We are officially 50 days out from the start of the NFL season and the return of fantasy football. And I'm dropping my top 50 overall rankings for PPR leagues here. This is for single quarterback PPR leagues here. And this is going to be a lot of fun. My article with my top 50 rankings will be available over at Fantasy Points. And if you want to get a good start to your season, you can use the code THEO2025. Get you a little something off over at fantasypoints.com. Fantasy Football Daily, we're going to be dropping shows like this 3 times a week, even more in season. We're going to help you crush your leagues this season. No time to waste. We're 50 days out, so let's get it started. What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
There is absolutely no hesitation. My number one player this season is Ja'Marr Chase. Chase hit the wide receiver trifecta in 2024. Had his first wide receiver 1 overall finish. He had one of the most dominant fantasy seasons we've ever seen at the wide receiver position. Led the league in catches with 127. Had the most touchdown receptions at 17. Led the league in receiving yardage at over 1,700 last year. 24 years old, he's in his prime, and he's tied to one of the league's best quarterbacks in Joe Burrow. This season, the Bengals gave Ja'Marr Chase a 4-year deal worth $161 million, the most that's ever been given to a wide receiver. The only reason that you would fade Ja'Marr Chase as the wide receiver 1 this year is historically being the wide receiver 1 overall is difficult. It's difficult to repeat. We haven't seen it in a while. Cooper Kupp nearly did it and then was injured. But if you go back in time, Antonio Brown did this a few times. And Ja'Marr Chase, everything is set up for the Bengals to score a ton of points. And Chase is one of the best spike week players around. So even if he gives you a down week, Chase is capable of dropping a 40-pointer multiple times in the season. He is truly, truly an unbelievable player. And I'll take him at the number 1 pick, not only in PPR, but I'm also taking him at the number 1 pick in tight end premium leagues. And in Superflex leagues, he is my number 1 non-quarterback off the board. And I'm taking Ja'Marr Chase as high as the 4th overall pick in Superflex formats. Don't overthink it. Ja'Marr Chase at the 1 spot. Number 2 overall, this is when it gets a little interesting and when you can kind of plant your flag. And I'm planting a flag on Bijan Robinson. Bijan's 23 years old. Averaged 20 points per game last year. And that was after a relatively slow start. So he gets his 20-point per game season, has over 1,400 rushing yards last year, has over 60 receptions last year. This was Zach Robinson's first season as the Atlanta offensive coordinator. And Bijan took a major step forward from year 1, where we were complaining about Arthur Smith using Tyler Algier over him at times, which was absolutely ridiculous at the time. But with Zach Robinson, we have competent offensive coordinator. Bijan gave you almost 1,900 combined yards last year. And the sample size for Bijan in games with Michael Penix was very, very promising. I'm going to bet on Bijan at 23 years old over Saquon Barkley at 28. A lot of people are like, where's Saquon? His name's going to be called soon, but it's Bijan Robinson for me. And he's my RB1 and the number 2 player on this list. But I almost considered putting Jahmyr Gibbs here. But with Gibbs, who comes in at number 3 overall in my rankings, you have the threat of David Montgomery. And David Montgomery last year scored 12 rushing touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs was simply unbelievable, and he's really been unbelievable for 2 straight seasons. Over their first 2 seasons in the league, Jahmyr Gibbs has now outscored Barry Sanders in terms of touchdowns, which is really unheard of. Jahmyr Gibbs has 31 touchdowns in 2 seasons in his first 2 seasons in the league. Barry Sanders had 30. And Jahmyr Gibbs did that with 1 more game played than Sanders, which is just remarkable. And when you consider Jahmyr Gibbs scoring all these touchdowns, that's with David Montgomery scoring a ton of touchdowns himself. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs could break fantasy this year. 23 years old. He's had 52 receptions in 2 consecutive seasons. That number could trend up. You also could see new offensive coordinator John Morton utilizing Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit more than we saw under Ben Johnson. Now, with Ben Johnson and the Dan Campbell era, we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs play a near 50-50 split with David Montgomery. What happens if that's 65-35 Jahmyr Gibbs this year? What happens if that's 60-40, but Jahmyr Gibbs sees a uptick in reception total? There's so many metrics here that Jahmyr Gibbs could hit, where Jahmyr Gibbs could give you a breaks fantasy type 25 point per game season. So, I mean, I honestly considered Gibbs over Bijan. Bijan, though, stays at RB1 overall. Bijan is number 2 on the list. Jahmyr Gibbs at number 3. Number 4 is Justin Jefferson, 25 years old still. Justin Jefferson averaged 18.7 points per game last year, and people were like, this is not that great a year from Justin Jefferson, which is crazy. But Justin Jefferson last year, of course, year 1 with Sam Darnold behind center. So Jefferson had a new quarterback and was still able to give us 18.7 points per game. But the fact that we wanted a little bit more from Jefferson last year just speaks volumes to how good a player he's been. Ever since he came into the league, Justin Jefferson has been completely dominant. Of course, he had that unbelievable rookie season. He has a wide receiver 1 overall season under his belt. There's really nothing to think about here. The best threat and the biggest threat to being the new wide receiver 1 this season over Ja'Marr Chase would be his former LSU teammate, Justin Jefferson. And spoiler alert, I got a number of LSU wide receivers who are going to come in early in my rankings. Really, it's wide receiver U right here. Unbelievable how many LSU receivers are high up in these rankings. But Justin Jefferson, really one of the best fantasy football assets you could have, right alongside Ja'Marr Chase. Just an unbelievable talent. If you want to take him ahead of Chase this year, I'd probably tell you that's a mistake, but I wouldn't argue with you because talent-wise, these guys are just in a league of their own. Unbelievable players. Jefferson at 4 overall. Now, number 5 is Saquon Barkley. And Saquon Barkley, you're going to have to spend a pick higher than 5 in most leagues for him. And I am not off of Saquon this year. I'm drafting him when he falls to the 4, the 5, the 6. I have exposure to him when it comes to underdog contests, best ball contests. I still have a ton of Saquon Barkley on some very high stakes dynasty teams. But I do have some apprehension here about Saquon Barkley being the repeat RB1 overall. It's just such a tall ask. Last year, Barkley had the most touches for any single running back since 2014. He had over 480 touches, including the Super Bowl run for Philly. And that scares me a little bit. The last 2 running backs before Saquon Barkley to hit that sort of insane volume, you're talking about DeMarco Murray back in 2014, Arian Foster a few years before that. Both of those players had unbelievable seasons where they hit that insane volume, and then the following year, their points per game dropped off. And with Murray and Arian Foster, neither one of them was cooked by any means because the year after, they had the unbelievable season volume-wise. The following year, their production drops off. And then the following year after that, they were able to bounce back. But both of them had significant point-per-game reductions. So with Saquon, you can make a bull case that, Theo, this is all wrong. Why are you putting Saquon at 5? And you would be right on that because he averaged 5.8 yards per carry last year. He had a 22.2 point per game average. He was the league winner last year for many of you, including myself in some leagues, because we were able to get Saquon Barkley at like the 1-2 turn. Unbelievable. And with Saquon, he gets to run behind an offensive line that we have ranked number 1 at fantasy points. Our offensive line expert, Scott DiBenedetto, has Philly at number 1 for the best offensive line in football. And of course, Saquon Barkley gets to play alongside Jalen Hurts, a dynamic running threat at the quarterback position. So keeping Saquon at 5 seems slightly dangerous. I mean, which is crazy to think. So Saquon Barkley for me, I'm still in on, but I'm not in on him at ADP. I prefer the two 23-year-old backs over Saquon, and I'm going to leave him right here at 5. Top 50 rankings for 2025, 50 days out from the start of the NFL season. And Fantasy Points is going to have you covered for everything you need to dominate your leagues. Make sure you're checking out School of Scott, my other podcast that I do with Scott Barrett. Make sure you're checking out my Dynasty podcast, Dynasty Life, and check out all of the other amazing podcasts that we have over at Fantasy Points. And make sure you subscribe to Fantasy Points YouTube. We've added so many new subs to YouTube. We're putting out awesome content nearly every single day, including hopefully this one, and hopefully you like this video as well. Number 6 on my list. Could have gone a number of ways here. 23 years old, it's Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua is a real threat to Ja'Marr Chase, a real threat to Justin Jefferson, to finish as the number 1 or number 2 wide receiver in football. Puka's awesome. There's not a whole lot to say about Puka. At some point in his career, I believe Puka Nacua will be a 200 target player, which is crazy. We haven't had a 200 target player since Calvin Johnson. CeeDee Lamb a few years back had 180 plus. But when it comes down to it, Puka Nacua, he's just awesome. He's a target magnet. He was excellent as a rookie. Last year on a per game basis, he was on track for 160 targets. You're going to want to have some exposure to Puka Nacua this season. I think this could be his best season ever. And we see Cooper Kupp gone, replaced by Davante Adams, who I'm also very, very bullish on. Davante Adams and Puka Nacua, we are projecting to both finish as wide receiver 1s over at Fantasy Points. But Puka Nacua, we are projecting to finish as a top 3 scorer at the wide receiver position. And right behind Puka Nacua at 7 overall, CeeDee Lamb, 26 years old. CeeDee Lamb has now had 3 straight seasons with at least 150 targets and 100 catches. Unbelievable for CeeDee Lamb. Last season, Lamb had a slow start to the season and then had to overcome the season-ending loss to Dak Prescott. Still averaged 17.6 points per game. Had the season-ending AC joint injury. And that really was unfortunate because Lamb was having his best stretch of the season fantasy-wise. From weeks 14 through 16, he averaged 21.8 points per game. Dak's back this year. Dallas is going to pass a lot. Don't overthink it. CeeDee Lamb is a great pick for you inside of the first round. Number 8 overall, a big riser for me. I dropped a top 50 overall rankings article back in May, and De'Von Achane, I had inside of the first round. I had him at 11 overall. He rises up to number 8 overall. Last year, De'Von Achane led all running backs in receptions with 78, all running backs in receiving yardage with 592, and he had 6 touchdown grabs. In games Tua Tagovailoa started, De'Von Achane had 6 catches per game, and he averaged like 22 points per game in games where Tua was starting. So unbelievable. Achane has 23 touchdowns in 28 regular season games as a pro. He has RB1 overall potential this season in 2025, and he's a big beneficiary of the Jonnu Smith trade. Jonnu's gone. If Miami continues this low ADOT approach where it's get the ball out of Tua's hands quickly and as often as possible, Achane is certainly going to eat. But he's more than that. Achane's also going to see more inside running opportunities. That's sort of the word, where Achane's a smaller back, but he is absolutely nasty on inside runs. And of course, when he gets outside, he has world-class speed to get to the house. We all remember the rookie season where his yards per carry average was like 7.8 per game. I think he's going to go north of 5 yards per carry this season, and Achane is going to have an unbelievable year. Number 9, Ashton Jeanty, 21 years old. I have drafted Ashton Jeanty considerably this offseason. I drafted him in an FFPC main event at the 202. I started out with Puka Nacua. I drafted Jeanty afterwards, and I was a little surprised that I'm able to get Jeanty anywhere inside the second round. Now, I know it's towards the very beginning of the second round. I'm splitting hairs. But Ashton Jeanty, we compared to a Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott in terms of that's the kind of production he could have as a rookie. He was hands down the 101 in every single dynasty format and had excessively high draft capital. 6th overall pick in the NFL draft. Vegas has a pretty solid offensive line. In our offensive line rankings, they were a team where Scott DiBenedetto was pretty high on Ashton Jeanty. You can also check out the podcast I did with Scott DiBenedetto, That was on School of Scott podcast, where he broke down each and every offensive line in football. Jeanty also is going to play in the Chip Kelly offense. Pete Carroll wants to run the football. Jeanty's a great pick, comes in at 9 overall, and you're able to get him a few picks later often. So grab Jeanty at the turn. He is a strong bet to lead the NFL in running back touches this year. And his backup is 32-year-old Raheem Mostert. So Jeanty's also going to catch some passes this year. Awesome talent. Number 10 overall, Malik Nabers, 21 years old. Usage-wise, Malik Nabers broke fantasy points data. He had no peers last year, led all players in target share with 32.4%, ranked top 3 in air yard share with like a 46% air yard share. Absolutely filthy. Led the NFL in first read rate at 42.8%. We've seen the wide receiver 1 overall lead the NFL in targets and catches for 4 straight seasons. There's no reason Malik Nabers can't do it. Now, Malik Nabers comes in at 10 behind a few of these players because we have quarterback question marks in New York. Russell Wilson will start at quarterback. We like Jackson Dart behind him. Both those players could be solid. And Russell Wilson has talked about how Malik Nabers is the reason he came to New York. Malik Nabers is a player he thinks is an unbelievable talent. It's the best wide receiver Russell Wilson's ever played with. But will he have the tunnel vision to Malik Nabers to sort of overcompensate for how Russell Wilson is as an older quarterback right now? Remains to be seen. I think Malik Nabers, if everything goes right, you could be getting a league-winning talent here. But the question marks about the New York offense scare me just enough to keep him at 10 overall. And now that's 3 LSU wide receivers. Let's keep it going with a 4th. 4 LSU wide receivers inside my top 11 overall. Absolutely wild. And it's Brian Thomas Jr. comes in at 11. BTJ was unbelievable last year. Jacksonville had a bottom 8 offense, but BTJ averaged 18.8 points per game. Trevor Lawrence missed multiple games, and BTJ was still eating with Mac Jones. He had one of the best seasons ever for a rookie wide receiver. He was tied for 5th in the NFL with 10 touchdown grabs, was 5th in receiving yardage last year with 1,282, and he set a Jacksonville rookie those were rookie records for him. 5th all-time with 10 touchdown grabs, 5th all-time in receiving yards with nearly 1,300, and he set a Jacksonville rookie record with 87 receptions. This year we get Liam Cohen from Tampa Bay coming in. So now we have an innovative offensive coordinator who's talked about using BTJ inside in the slot as well as his usual outside dominance. We talk about these wide receiver 1 overall types. BTJ could be it. He reminds me on the field of in his prime Josh Gordon. And if anybody ever experienced the Josh Gordon wide receiver 1 overall season that we had back in the day, unbelievable. BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr., could be the league winner, and you're getting him at 11 overall. And this is a big year for Trevor Lawrence. He has Brian Thomas. He has Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter didn't crack my top 50, but I'm very bullish on him. He will be in the top 100 update when I update the article over at fantasypoints.com. Number 12 on my rankings is Nico Collins. Not a whole lot to say here. Nico Collins is awesome. Averaged 17.4 points per game in 2023, 17.3 points per game this past season. And it feels like we could have a little bit more. Nico has, as Scott Barrett said, Julio Jones-like potential for a massive spike season. His wide receiver target competition now, Stephon Diggs is gone. Tank Dell is injured. So we have 2 rookies we like, in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, as well as Christian Kirk, who came over for a 7th-round pick. That's really his main target competition. This could be Nico Collins' best season as a Houston Texan. Now, we talked about a bunch of wide receivers. Let's talk about a tight end, and it's Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers at 13 overall. He will be the consensus number 1 tight end in every single format this year, and he'll probably be the number 1 tight end drafted in your league for like the next 5-6 years. Unless Trey McBride has a just unbelievable season, it's hard to see a tight end overtaking Bowers. Bowers is just awesome. The torch has been officially passed from Travis Kelce back to Bowers, and Bowers could be unbelievable. We haven't seen a tight end average 20 points per game in PPR since Travis Kelce. Bowers broke Puka Nacua's record for receptions last year with 112, and he obliterated the tight end record set by Sam Laporta a year ago in 2 years ago in 2023. I mean, Bowers is just ridiculous. He is such a great player and such a great value in PPR leagues. In formats like FFPC, he's worth a top 6 pick, but on Underdog, you're able to get him in the middle of the second round, DraftKings middle of the second round. That's for best ball. And in NFFC, PPR format, high stakes, Bowers sometimes falls to like the 23, 24 pick. You might get a wide receiver 5 type season out of a tight end that you're able to get. An absolute cheat code for drafters is Brock Bowers. 14 overall for me, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god, 25 years old. He's had 3 straight seasons with at least 106 receptions and at least 1,160 receiving yards. So he's been consistent. He's an absolute killer. He had 22 touchdown catches over the last 2 seasons, trailing only Mike Evans and Ja'Marr Chase. I put him here at 14 behind those other receivers, and I'm a little bit like unexcited to draft him this year, which feels really weird because he's been a target of mine in many seasons. I like drafting him when he falls to like the first few picks of the second round, but I haven't pulled the trigger on the Sun God inside of round 1. A little worried that this cleanup knee surgery this past offseason, the Lions are saying all the right things, but I don't like hearing about a cleanup procedure in the offseason. So I put him here behind a few of those younger wide receivers. I also think Jameson Williams is going to have a really, really big year. And we have the offensive coordinator change. Detroit could slightly regress as an offense. They of course lose Frank Ragnow, their center. There's going to be some changes in the offensive line. They're not going to be bad. Detroit is still going to be one of the best teams in football, but their offense was like otherworldly under Ben Johnson. They could regress and be like a top 8 offense instead of like a top 3 offense this year. So I'm a little bit below ADP on Amon-Ra. Not very much. He's still 14 overall, but a little bit behind. 50 days out from the start of fantasy football. Fantasy Points is going to be your home to crushing your leagues this year. And will Christian McCaffrey be one that's going to help you crush leagues? This is a player that I had ranked lower than this. I moved him up just a little bit. I had him at like 17 or 18 in May. But I have all of these colleagues of mine at Fantasy Points telling me, Theo, you're too low on CMC. You're too low on CMC. He's 28 years old. CMC is still capable of having a season that breaks fantasy. He's risen up, though. At 15 overall in my rankings, I'm not going to get him in too many drafts. I did draft him in one FFPC main event at the 1-2 turn, but mostly I haven't been able to pull the trigger on CMC when he's available at like 8 overall, 7 overall. He's jumped Ashton Jeanty. He goes before De'Von Achane, 2 players that I'm a little bit more enthusiastic about. For me, it's just, does San Francisco try to keep Christian McCaffrey a little more fresh this year? Do they want to keep him fresh for a playoff run, or are they going to unleash him completely? If they unleash him completely, then I'm way too low on him with this ranking. And CMC is capable of a 70-plus reception season, getting back to those sort of numbers and averaging 20 points per game. So CMC is sort of a litmus test for drafters now. I think some people are willing to take him as high as 6. And then there's some people like me who are a little bit apprehensive about a player at his age coming off of a big injured season. So he's a range of outcomes player. Let me know in the comments what you think of CMC. And again, I will say I did draft him in one FFPC main event. So this is not a fade for me. It's just not a player that I'm going to put up at 5, 6, 7 in my rankings. And if I'm not willing to rank him up there, I'm probably going to miss out on him in a lot of leagues. We'll see what happens. 16 overall, Drake London. Anybody who watches my podcast knows that Drake London is my dark horse to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall. I talked about Zach Robinson and what he's able to do for Bijan Robinson. Zach Robinson, I have a lot of hope in Robinson being a real offensive coordinator that we're talking about this year as a riser. Last year, Drake London averaged 16.5 points per game. He had 100 catches, 1,271 receiving yards, 9 touchdown catches. But what's really, really promising about London is in Michael Penix's 3 starts, London was targeted 39% of the time and had a first read rate of 45.1% of the time. I love London. I think he's a great, great target. And if you don't like London in the second round, consider Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey comes in at 17 overall for me. And I think a lot of analysts will have Ladd McConkey as like a league winner this year. He had an absurd 197-yard, 9-catch game in the NFL playoffs. So the recency bias is really strong with him, but he had already broken Keenan Allen's rookie year record with 82 catches last year for 1,155 receiving yards. Really terrific rookie season. I mean, better than expected. McConkey was a player that a lot of people were in on in Dynasty, but he averaged over 15 points per game last year as a rookie. And I think he's going to have the best season ever, fantasy-wise, for a receiver in a Greg Roman offense. Ladd McConkey is just awesome. 18 overall, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, 31 years old. And I guess I'm an ageist here because if Derrick Henry was 27, I'd probably have him 5 spots higher. And I'm just subconsciously gonna fade a guy, not really fade a guy, but I'm not I don't have to reach for Derrick Henry because he goes about this range in drafts. Just drafted him last year in an FFPC league, in an FFPC best ball tournament where I was able to start out with Brock Bowers, get Derrick Henry in round 2. Derrick Henry here, you want to target wide receiver in round 1. You know you're going to be able to get Derrick Henry, oftentimes De'Von Achane inside of round 2. There's not a whole lot to say about Henry. Henry was awesome last year. He averaged 19.8 points per game, 4th overall among all running backs last year. He had 16 rushing touchdowns. And the Todd Monken offense has just been printing fantasy points like an ATM machine the last 2 years in Baltimore. Oh, and the quarterback he plays next to is awesome in Lamar Jackson. 19 overall, A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, there's not a whole lot to say. 27 years old, averaged 16.7 points per game last year. I mean, A.J. Brown is awesome. The problem is it's the target volume. Is it going to be there for A.J. Brown to crush leagues, give us a 20-point-per-game season? Not sure. In Philly, you've got Jalen Hurts, you've got Saquon Barkley. They want to run the football, and the target volume last year was low. But A.J. just reminded everybody just how good he was, or good he is, last year in the playoffs. He had touchdowns in the NFC title game. He had a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He's awesome. Not a whole lot to say about AJ. AJ is a great value inside of round 2. 20 overall for me, Chase Brown. Chase Brown, 24 years old. From weeks 9 through 17 last year, Brown averaged 20.6 points per game. This was the 5th most among all running backs. He had a true breakout season. He had 58 touches as a rookie and then 283 last year. No running back competition was added to Cincinnati. And I know there's people out there that are very much in on Taj Brooks, but with Taj Brooks, we're talking about a 6th-round rookie that still has to win the number 2 running back role. If you want to draft Taj Brooks as a handcuff, go ahead. I think he's a good player too. But Chase Brown is going to be another big part of this Cincinnati offense. At 20 overall, I'm a little bit ahead of Chase Brown where he's at in ADP. You're able to get Chase Brown in the early 3rd round a lot, very often when it comes to FFPC, NFFC, Underdog, DraftKings, you name it. You can get Chase Brown there. Great pick this year. 21 overall, Trey McBride. Trey McBride, we talked about Bowers. I guess the argument against taking Bowers is I really like my tight end 2, and I really like my tight end 3. Trey McBride was sensational last year, and what he lacked were the touchdown catches. Analytics-wise, he was neck and neck with Bowers. He had 112 targets to Bowers' 111. He averaged 15.6 points per game. Bowers averaged 15.5. And McBride led all tight ends in target share with 26.5%. And he ended up with the 4th most receptions by a tight end. He had 112 receptions. So he ended up with the 4th most receptions by a tight end in a single season ever. And I think just by staying healthy this year, McBride and Bowers are both going to break Zach Ertz, the record that he set for targets at the tight end position. We're in like a new day and age of like what these tight ends can do target wise. McBride was also given a massive contract. Arizona made him the highest paid tight end in football this past offseason. Like McBride could end up being a league wrecker this year and just dominate leagues. He only had 2 receiving touchdowns last year. So some people hate the term positive touchdown regression, but this is sort of why it was invented. Trey McBride could score 4 times as many touchdowns 5 times as many touchdowns as he did last year, and I wouldn't be shocked. He is an awesome player. He is in a number one role. He is a great way for you to attack the tight end position, and you're able to get him later than Bowers in every single format. I was in an NFFC online championship draft, which is a $350 entry, high stakes draft. And NFFC is not tight end premium. I was able to get Trey McBride in like the middle of round 3, which I thought was an exceptional value. 22 overall is Rashee Rice. And I know there's some people that are a little bit higher on Rashee Rice than I am. I know there's some people that are pushing Rashee Rice like inside the top 15 overall. I'm high on him. And I think 22 overall is about appropriate for where he should be. And the sample size is small, but last year, Rashee Rice averaged 21.6 points per game with a 31.5% target share and a 40.1% first read rate. That's over the first 3 weeks of the season. Then, of course, disaster struck, and he was injured on that like fluke play. So Rashee Rice now steps onto a Kansas City team where they got dominated in the Super Bowl. I think Rice can be the focal point of this entire offense. He's the first down maker for Patrick Mahomes, and Xavier Worthy I'm higher on than many, but I think these two will coexist, and we're going to see Kansas City in a wide receiver dominant offense more so than we've really ever seen. And I think Travis Kelce ends up taking a third fiddle role, like a number 3 target type role in this offense. So you're going to see a lot of wide receiver targets. Rashee Rice could put up, an Amon-Ra St. Brown like season if it all falls in play. Now, he's also going to see extreme usage in the slot, so there's a chance for him to be a PPR merchant and really, really put up some numbers. Very, very high on Rashee Rice, but not as high on him as some people that are pushing him inside the top 15. 23 overall for me, Bucky Irving. I love Bucky Irving this year. And you're able to get Bucky Irving sometimes at the beginning of the 3rd round. I pulled the trigger there. You don't need to take him inside of round 2 in every single format. You know your league, you know your league mates, but Bucky Irving gives you a great way to catch up at the running back position. Last year, he had 47 receptions. He had 1,122 rushing yards, which is a 5.4 yards per carry average. And he overtook Rachaad White, who was a top 6 running back in 2023. Bucky Irving just completely dominated Rachaad White in the playoff game. They lost the playoff game to Washington, but Irving completely dominated White. I think Rachaad White takes a big step back this year in terms of usage, and Tampa Bay embraces Bucky Irving. Irving is really, really talented, and if he sees an uptick in receptions and goes from like a 47 catch player to like a 65 catch player, which would take Tampa Bay sort of winding Rachaad White back, making him a little bit more of a direct handcuff, then I think Bucky Irving could end up being a top 5 scorer at the running back position. That's in the range of outcomes. And the offensive coordinator change in Tampa Bay doesn't scare me because they promoted Josh Grizzard, who was under Liam Cohen last year. I think it's going to be a lot of more of the same, and I think that's going to mean a lot of Bucky Irving. 24 overall. I'm a little bit higher than the market on Jaxon Smith-Njigba. 23 years old. JSN had 100 catches last year, tied the Seattle record, and people are a little bit worried about JSN. Last year, he had 1,130 receiving yards. Very good, but I think there's room to run as a receiver. DK Metcalf is now a Pittsburgh Steeler. Tyler Lockett is now a Tennessee Titan. So the two the two wide receivers that we're used to seeing in Seattle are now gone. This is JSN's offense. Cooper Kupp comes in as the wide receiver too, but Cooper Kupp is getting up there in age. This is a JSN offense, and JSN led the NFL in players who had 50 or more targets in slot percentage. He was in the slot like 80+% of the time. That'll take a step back this year. You'll see Cooper Kupp in the slot. JSN probably falls back to like a 50% of the time slot player. Like, he's not disappearing from the slot, but I think that scared some drafters off, and I think that's a mistake because I think there's a chance that we see JSN with a much better ADOT than last year. Last year, his average depth of target was only 9.2. I think there's going to be more chances for bigger plays downfield for JSN. You're able to get him inside of round 3, sometimes towards the tail end of round 3. I think he's going to be drafted higher in 2026. Keep an eye on JSN in your league. If he falls, you could be drafting a unbelievable value. Number 25 for me, we talked about the Bengals. My 3rd Cincinnati Bengal comes in here. Tee Higgins, 26 years old. re-signed with the Bengals this offseason. They paid him. The gang stays together. You got Joe Burrow, Ja'Marr Chase, Tee Higgins, and Chase Brown. And you got a defense that's going to be generous. A lot to like here. Tee Higgins averaged 18.5 points per game last year, the best of his career. And that was the 5th highest among all wide receivers, 18.5 points per game. And he had a 23.1 target share. Like anybody who had Tee Higgins last year, we're never going to forget him putting up a 40-pointer in week 17. Unbelievable game against Denver where he basically won a lot of people fantasy championships. The Bengals gave him $115 million this offseason, and that's the most money ever paid for a wide receiver 2 in the history of football. They're going to get a lot out of him. Now, 26 overall, Jonathan Taylor, and some people are putting Jonathan Taylor a little bit higher than this. JT's fine for me. I take JT when he's at the 2-3 turn. I don't see a reason to reach for him. JT at 25 years old, if everything goes his way, he's going to finish as a round 1 type fantasy producer. Unbelievable to end the year last year. He was RB1 overall in week 16, RB1 overall in week 17. He had 354 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns in those 2 games. The splits are also promising. If Anthony Richardson is not the starter and it's Daniel Jones, Jonathan Taylor actually performed better in games without Anthony Richardson last year. So the whole mobile quarterback opens up the running back narrative was not really the case for Taylor. He was better in games without Richardson last year. I think that the volume will be there for Taylor. The offensive line in Indianapolis is very good. Now, Taylor doesn't give you much as a receiver, but he never really has. During his RB1 overall season, he had something like 40-something receptions. I don't think he'll even hit that, but I think Taylor is in the mix to lead the NFL in rush attempts this year. And of course, we saw what those spike weeks could look at. So I might end up being too low on Jonathan Taylor here at 26. And if you're prioritizing him, consider taking him as high as 21, 22. He sometimes goes in that range. 27 overall for me, Garrett Wilson, 24 years old. You now have the shower narrative, the locker narrative, whatever you want to call it. His former college quarterback, Justin Fields, takes over. We saw DJ Moore finish as the wide receiver 6 overall alongside Fields a few years back in Chicago. Garrett Wilson sort of has that potential this year to lead the NFL in target share. Now, I didn't say targets, but target share. He could be a hyper-targeted player this year. You have Tanner Engstrand taking over in New York. This is a Ben Johnson disciple. Of course, Aaron Glenn, also coming from that Detroit coaching staff, brings Tanner Engstrand over. And I think you're going to see a ton of Garrett Wilson. Aaron Glenn's talked about him this year. They want to get him the ball as much as possible. Last year, he was 4th in the NFL in targets with 153, averaged 14.8 points per game. He had a career high in catches with 101. He had a career high in receiving yards with 1,104 and a career high in touchdown catches with 7. But he was overdrafted last year at the 1-2 turn. So you had to use the 13th or 14th pick on Garrett Wilson last year. This year, you're able to get him inside of round 3. He could be a phenomenal value. 28 overall, Josh Jacobs. I'm about in line with Jacobs. I'm a little bit behind ADP, and I get the enthusiasm for him. For me, it feels like he's going to regress a little bit. He was awesome last year. He had 15 rushing touchdowns. I think Green Bay wants to be a little bit more balanced, but Josh Jacobs is still the focal point of the offense. He's 26 years old as well. So we've actually had a trend of running backs in this age range finishing as the RB1 overall for a few straight years. So Josh Jacobs right there. Lamar Jackson at 29, Josh Allen at 30, and Jaden Daniels at 31. I have all 3 quarterbacks back to back to back here. I think all 3 quarterbacks are edge picks for you in fantasy football. Now, the one that I'm probably the highest on is Jaden Daniels, but he's drafted the lowest. So in my rankings, I have Daniels as quarterback 3, but I do think he could finish as the quarterback 1 overall. Now, know your format, know your ADP. You're not going to have to spend this pick on these 3 players in a lot of formats. So again, I have all 3 quarterbacks back to back to back here. I view them as an elite tier, and I view these players as edges for you right now in fantasy football. You were sometimes able to get Lamar Jackson around the 402, around that 3-4 turn quite often. Usually Josh Allen is the first quarterback off the board. Sometimes it's Lamar Jackson is the first quarterback off the board. They're like neck and neck. And then usually when those two are selected, Jaden Daniels goes a few picks later. So I am very bullish on the elite quarterback tier this year. I think this is an edge for drafters, and you're able to get these players in round 3 or round 4 in a lot of formats. You're not having to use an excessively high draft pick. And I think the fact that all 3 are in store for massive seasons has kept the price for all 3 of them at a more realistic level. So Lamar Jackson, of course, was the QB1 overall last year. Josh Allen was a QB2 overall last year. Josh Allen's just been the QB1 overall multiple times in his career. Last year, he was doing it with new weapons around him, and he still was just ridiculous. Josh Allen had the 2 highest scoring weeks at the quarterback position, including a 51.4 pointer. And Lamar Jackson was just absolutely ridiculous, had his best passing season as a pro. And we think Baltimore's offense could be even better this year with guys being healthier. You got Keaton Mitchell coming back. He's going to be an explosive threat. You have Mark Andrews coming back. Of course, Derrick Henry in year 2, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and a really good offensive line and a great offensive coordinator. So all 3 quarterbacks come in their own little mini tier from 29, 30, and 31. Talking about my top 50 overall rankings. Make sure you check out everything over at Fantasy Points. Make sure you're subscribing to all of our awesome podcasts, including Dynasty Life, My Dynasty Show, and School of Scott, which I do with Scott Barrett every single week here. George Kittle comes in at 32 overall. George Kittle is 31 years old, but he is an absolute beast. Last year had 1,106 receiving yards and averaged more points per game than Bowers or McBride. Of course, missed a couple of games, but he averaged 15.8 points per game. George Kittle, absolutely awesome. Checks in on the list here. And you can make a case that Kittle might be the best value in fantasy this year because he gives you tight end 1 overall, and you're able to get him lower than this. So 32 overall, you're not going to necessarily have to use this sort of pick on Kittle unless you're in like FFPC. If you're on DraftKings, if you're on Underdog, if you're on NFFC, if you're in a sleeper league, if you're on a Yahoo league, an ESPN league, you're not going to have to use 32 overall for Kittle. But if you want to reach on him a little bit, I think he's a massive, massive edge for you. And you can make an argument that this is the least intimidating group of wide receivers collectively around Kittle at any point in his career. I love Juwan Jennings. I have a lot of Juwan Jennings. Ricky Pearsall is really, really exciting. But Brandon Ayuk is more likely than not going to miss the start of the season. Deebo Samuel is now a Washington Commander. So Kittle could end up seeing a higher amount of targets than we're used to. Kittle is usually 95 or fewer targets. This year could creep up to a little bit higher than we're used to based on San Francisco paying him and wanting to get as much as possible out of Kittle until this wide receiver room sort of settles in. Number 33 overall for me, Davante Adams, 32 years old, but he averaged 17.2 points per game last year. Splitting time between Vegas and the New York Jets, 2 of the league's lowest scoring teams, and he still averaged 17.2 points per game. Now we get to see Davante Adams in a Sean McVay-led offense. I think Adams is ahead of where Cooper Kupp was last year, and we were drafting Kupp higher than this. I think that Adams is super exciting this year. He's been an edge pick. You sometimes can get him as late as like the 310 in FFPC. I think he's a consideration for you at the 2-3 turn. That's how enthusiastic we are about Davante Adams. And again, at Fantasy Points, we are projecting Davante Adams to finish as a wide receiver 1 this year. So an absolute value. Now, coming up a little bit in my rankings from May is Breece Hall. Breece Hall's 23 years old, checks in at 34 overall. I think things are setting up better for Breece Hall than the ADP market is treating him. We talked about Tanner Engstrand. Tanner Engstrand, I think, is going to be an aggressive offensive coordinator. I think Breece Hall is going to benefit from playing alongside a mobile quarterback like Justin Fields. And when you look at the lack of pass-catching weapons in New York, besides Garrett Wilson, I think there's a chance that Breece Hall could be the number 2 targeted jet. And if you're a running back who's a top 2 target on your team, you're going to put up the fantasy points. Breece Hall's never averaged fewer than 15 points per game. He's never rushed for 1,000 yards. This year, it could happen. Breece Hall, we were taking inside of round 1 last year. He could end up being a really strong value at the end of the third. 35 overall, a little bit ahead of ADP on Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker is 24 years old. I really love Clint Kubiak coming over from New Orleans as the new offensive coordinator. I'm higher in ADP, or I'm higher than ADP on Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I'm also higher than ADP on Kenneth Walker. And they're going to utilize the fullback position a lot this year in Seattle, something that we haven't seen. And I think that wrinkle is going to be really beneficial for Walker. Last year, he averaged 16.5 points per game. And despite playing only 11 games, Walker had 42 receptions. So the receiving numbers for Walker really took a big step forward from what we saw in the first 2 seasons of his career. So Walker, I think, is a really, really strong pick. Behind Walker, a player who's come up a lot for me in my rankings was Tyreek Hill. I had him inside the 40s in my initial ranking. Now he comes in at 36 overall. Not a whole lot to say here. Tyreek Hill was ridiculous in 2023. He was neck and neck with CeeDee Lamb to be the wide receiver 1 overall. He had a 31% target share. Just a ridiculous season for him. Last year, lost cause. Was one of the worst picks you could have made at ADP. He was taken inside the first 3 overall picks alongside CeeDee Lamb, alongside Christian McCaffrey, and Hill was just a disaster pick. His points per game dropped like 10 points per game, and his target share went from 31.1% down to 20.1%. Now, a lot of that could be because Tua Tagovailoa was out, but also we found out that Tyreek Hill was banged up throughout the season. It just feels like this could be a bounce back year, and he doesn't have to get back to a like superhuman like points per game when you're drafting him inside of round 3. He could get back to being a 17 point per game player and still have a huge impact. So Tyreek Hill lost like 10 pounds this offseason, like lost 10 pounds from what he was playing at last year. He's very, very motivated. The speed looks good. And of course, Tyreek Hill is Tyreek Hill. He's capable of having one more huge season in Miami. Another added bonus is I don't think Tyreek Hill's done. We talked about retiring early. I'm just not feeling that vibe. And I think Tyreek Hill, even if he's not a Miami Dolphin heading into 2026, I think he's going to get paid by somebody. And in order to do that, he's got to show that he's at least better than he was last year. So Tyreek Hill comes in at 36. You're going to have to pay more than that in a lot of leagues. He's up to 23 overall on underdog drafts. So I'm still lower than ADP, but I'm drafting Tyreek Hill in this range pretty confidently. I think if he has a few more strong weeks and we get the vibe stay strong, I might raise Tyreek Hill up just a few more spots in my rankings, but he's set in at 36. 37 overall, James Cook, 25-year-old running back for Buffalo Bills. I mean, last year, he was awesome. He had 18 touchdowns, second most in Bills history, trailing only O.J. Simpson. And he put up 28 points in Buffalo's loss in the AFC Championship game to Kansas City. Like, James Cook screams regression, but even if he regresses a little bit, he's going to be a value at ADP. I mean, he's a touchdown scorer. I mean, and it sounds simplistic, and these are the kind of players we often fade, but James Cook is very, very good. I do think Buffalo is going to work in multiple other running backs. I like Ray Davis. Ty Johnson's their receiving specialist, but at the end of the day, James Cook can probably still be an ADP winner. Just don't expect 18 touchdowns again. I think we're not chasing that kind of an outcome, but I think he could still have a very, very strong season. He's also playing for a contract. The situation is not like ugly. I don't think he's going to hold out. It doesn't benefit players these days to hold out. They lose too much money. But James Cook really wants to get a big contract from Buffalo. The two sides seem a little bit far apart, so we'll keep an eye on that one. 38 overall, Kyren Williams, another player who I think is going to regress a little bit. He's averaged 17.1 points per game, and he finished last season, and he finished third among all running backs with 316 carries, which seems like a really massive number. You also have added running back competition behind him with Jarquez Hunter and Blake Corum. Kyren Williams just doesn't break off the explosive runs, so he's really a volume bet, and he's also a player that we haven't seen take a big step forward as a receiver, which is a little bit odd because coming out of Notre Dame, we figured that would be his specialty in the NFL. So Kyren Williams, I'll be a little bit behind consensus, but hey, he could burn me this season at this ranking. He's been really, really good in the McVay offense, and even with enthusiasm for Jarquez Hunter that I have and Blake Corum being around, And despite Les Snead, the general manager there, saying that LA could use a committee, that's never been a Sean McVay thing. So Williams could finish as an RB1 for 3 straight seasons, which would be very significant. Keep an eye on the contract situation. Unlike James Cook, it sounds like Kyren Williams is going to get paid. 39 overall for me, Omarion Hampton, 21 years old. He's just checked so many boxes. 220, 441, 40-yard dash. They draft him inside of round 1, back-to-back 1,500-yard seasons, back-to-back seasons with 15 touchdowns or more, and 67 catches over his last 2 seasons in LA. Now we've got Najee Harris with a potential eye injury, which went from like a weird rumor on X to something that actually happened. So I don't think that's even a thing. I had Omarion Hampton here in this ranking before the Najee news. So I'm ahead of consensus on Omarion Hampton. I think he's a stud. And I think that he's the kind of player that if Harris is fully healthy, we'll have to wait for like a full-on Omarion Hampton. But by the time we get to the fantasy football playoffs, he could be an absolute stud. And I don't think it's I don't think it's out of the question that you're taking Omarion Hampton in the first round in 2026. 40 overall, Marvin Harrison Jr. We took him at the turn last year, and that didn't work out very well. Now, this year, the cost is not so prohibitive. I took Harrison Jr. in the 4th round of an FFPC main event, and you're going to have to take him a little bit higher than this. On Underdog, he's going at like the 2-3 turn, but FFPC, he sometimes falls into the tail end of round 3 and occasionally into the early round 4. That's where I was able to get him. Not a whole lot to say here. Harrison Jr. was one of the better college prospects we've seen in quite some time. Of course, was outscored by Malik Nabers, outscored by Brian Thomas Jr., outscored by Ladd McConkey last year. Now he's going well behind all these guys. He could have a huge bounce back season. And it's not like he was awful last year. He had 8 touchdown scores, had 800 plus receiving yards. It was the inconsistency. Had a bunch of high scoring weeks and a bunch of low scoring weeks. This year that needs to settle out. The guy got a lot stronger this offseason. A lot of talk about how much work he put in. So Marvin Harrison Jr. could have a bounce back season, but this is not an absolute sure thing slam dunk. I think that Arizona will get this thing right. I think Harrison Jr. is going to end up being an okay to fine pick at ADP, but I don't think this is necessarily like we're going to draft him and he's just going to be a league crusher and get back to what we thought he was going to be. We still have him as the number 2 target. We also have the limitations we saw in the offense. They've got to figure out how to use Marvin Harrison Jr. and use him more consistently. So like to put it in perspective, last year he had 8 games with 15 points or more, and then he had 6 games with 6 points or fewer. I do think that those floor games are going to disappear, and that alone makes him a better pick than last year. But I think this is a good ranking for him. Some people might think this is a little too low. I think it's realistic. Another player that I'm high on, and this is another player that's all over the place. Xavier Worthy comes in at 41 overall. Worthy was really, really strong down the stretch. He had 19 or more points in 3 consecutive games towards the end of the regular season, and then had that huge performance in the AFC title game where he had 6 catches for 85 and a touchdown. And then he had that Super Bowl game where I know it was garbage time, but we still count fantasy points in garbage time. He had 8 catches for 157 yards and 2 touchdown grabs. So 2 Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers come in my top 41 overall. Xavier Worthy, 21 years old. I think he's going to be a player that has a wide range of outcomes. He could really, really hit. He could also take a big back seat and be a little bit more sporadic in his high-scoring games. But I'm bullish on Worthy this year. I think he's a really strong pick at ADP with upside. Again, I think the Kansas City offense is going to be very wide receiver-centric. 42 overall, Terry McLaurin. Last year had one of his best seasons as a pro. It was a Jaden Daniels effect. Him and McLaurin completely clicked. McLaurin set a Washington franchise record with 13 touchdown grabs. His ADP has moved way, way up, but McLaurin is still a player that I think is going to have a very strong year. Now, 42 overall, you probably won't get him. A lot of times he's going at that 3-4 turn inside of round 3 in PPR wide receiver heavy formats like NFFC, 3-4 turn for the FFPC. On best ball formats like Underdog and DraftKings, a little bit higher than this 42 overall. He's still the number 1 player in Washington, the number 1 threat for Jaden Daniels. I just think that 13 touchdown grabs is a difficult number for you to bet on. And McLaurin, a lot of his scoring last year was touchdown aided. 43 overall, Tet McMillan. I love Tet McMillan this year. I think Tet McMillan is going to have an awesome season. And I could rank him higher than this. I think Tet McMillan could flirt with low-end wide receiver 1 numbers. He is in a great spot. The Dave Canales offense, I think, is screaming for a player like this. McMillan is 6'5", 210. He's got elite hands, great route running, and he makes spectacular highlight reel catches. Carolina selected him 8 overall, which is the highest wide receiver pick that they've ever made. He's very similar to me to like a Drake London, and there's an outside chance he could hit that 16 point per game mark that Drake London had last year. Now, you don't necessarily have to reach for him. You could take your exposure to Tet when he's available to you at ADP, but I have him at 43 overall. 44 overall, DJ Moore. And Chicago players are hard to value. I think we all are betting on the Ben Johnson offense taking a big step forward. Caleb Williams taking a big step forward in year 2. It just makes sense to me. Ben Johnson was a quarterback whisperer in Detroit, turned things around with Jared Goff. I think it could happen with Caleb Williams as well. And DJ Moore is still the best bet among all these wide receivers. Certainly Rome Odunze, Colston Loveland, Luther Burden. The target competition there is strong, but DJ Moore still finished like last season as the wide receiver 14, which felt lower than that because he started off the year slow. But when Shane Waldron was fired, DJ Moore started playing a little bit better. He's still the best bet to make in Chicago. I have him at 44 overall. 45 overall, Alvin Kamara, 30-year-old running back in New Orleans, still is a player who's playing at an unbelievable level. I think he's going to regress a little bit, but even if he regresses a little bit, he still will pay off in this range. Averaged 19 points per game last year, which was 5th highest among all running backs. He set a career high in rushing yards with 950, and he finished second to only De'Von Achane in receptions and receiving yards of the position. Kamara is what he is. He's going to be the focal point of the New Orleans backfield until he retires. And Kamara is set to give you still 15 points per more. A 15-point per game season, I think, is a realistic bet for an offense that could be struggling at times with a new head coach. Kellen Moore knows what he's doing offensively, but it's still a challenge with Tyler Shuck or Spencer Rattler behind center. So Kamara comes in at 45 overall. 46 overall, Mike Evans just doesn't get old. He's had 11,000-yard receiving seasons in a row, trailing only Jerry Rice now. And despite playing only 14 games last year, he had 11 touchdown catches, which gave him 24 touchdown grabs over the last 2 years. 46 overall could actually be low on Evans. I just think there's going to be the target competition in Tampa. You've also got the chance that Bucky Irving takes a big step forward in touches. Of course, Baker Mayfield has elevated this passing game. Baker had more than 40 touchdown passes last year. Unbelievable year for Baker. We do lose Tristan Wirfs, their best offensive lineman, for the start of the year. So this feels about right for Mike Evans, somewhere inside of the 4th round. 47 overall, Joe Burrow, who actually have ahead of Jalen Hurts, which a lot of people will argue against. And I have Hurts, spoiler alert, at 51 overall. So he doesn't make my top 50, but he's right outside of it. So Burrow and Hurts are sort of in their own little mini tier. But with Burrow, he led the NFL in touchdown passes with 43, finished as a QB3 overall. He had 70.6% completion percentage, and he broke all these Bengals records. He's got the ridiculous pair of wide receivers in Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins, and a team that could be a shootout team. It feels like 2013 Peyton Manning, where you could see Joe Burrow actually pass for 50 touchdowns. So despite not having the rushing ability of the big 3 quarterbacks that I referenced or Jalen Hurts at 51, Joe Burrow is still absolutely like that and a player that could put up huge numbers this year. 48, Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard had averaged 16 points per game last year. He had 10 rushing touchdowns. He had 1,175 rushing yards, 43 receptions. The Dave Canales offense is just printed fantasy points at the running back position for 2 straight seasons. Rashad White in 2023 finished as a top 6 scorer. Last year, Chuba Hubbard finishing as an RB1. And they paid Chuba Hubbard. So I get it. Rico Dowdle, Trevor Etienne behind him are better than what he had behind him last year. But Chuba Hubbard still comes in my top 50. 49 is Jameson Williams, who takes a big step forward here under new offensive coordinator John Morton. last year, Jameson averaged 14.2 points per game, finished as the wide receiver 23 overall in points per game. I think that Jameson Williams has room to run this year and could have a really, really big season. Comes in at 49 overall. And number 50 overall for me, the final player inside the top 50, DK Metcalf, 28 years old, in Pittsburgh. They paid him an absolutely huge contract. Gets a 5-year, $150 million contract extension. The Pittsburgh Steelers traded a second-round pick for him. They trade away George Pickens. DK was Teflon this offseason. He gets paid a huge bag. He escapes George Pickens when they trade him away. He escapes Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And I think that DK has a chance to have his best season in like maybe the second best season of his entire career this year. Everything's set up for this offense to revolve around DK Metcalf. We've seen Aaron Rodgers sort of target his guy. And DK Metcalf is not Davante Adams. They're different players. But when you look at the wide receiver target competition in Pittsburgh, talking about Calvin Austin, you're talking about Roman Wilson. I understand Jonnu Smith is there. But DK Metcalf, I think, could have a very strong year. Pittsburgh was high up in terms of play action rate last year as a team. I think that continues this year. So you're going to get DK Metcalf on a lot of downfield looks. He's going to be a preferred target inside the red zone. And they paid him to be an alpha wide receiver. It's also a shootout division. Don't get it twisted. This is not the AFC North that you were watching 15 years ago when it was like Joe Flacco out there against Ben Roethlisberger. This is Lamar Jackson. This is Joe Burrow. And Pittsburgh, if they want to be as good as they think they are, and Pittsburgh has some talent on both sides of the ball. They were a playoff team last year. They're going to have to keep up with these teams. I know Aaron Rodgers wants to play slow. This is a little bit of a vibes-based take. And we have a trend going on here where a wide receiver gets traded and finishes as a wide receiver 1 pretty much every year. Last year, it was Jerry Jeudy. 2023, it was DJ Moore. And before that, it's name all these dudes. Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, all of those guys. So we've had a trend of traded wide receiver is underrated in ADP and ends up having a big year. Of course, I said Jalen Hurts is 51 overall, so I give you a bonus player. I'm going to do a follow-up article on fantasy points where I expand this to a top 100. Top 50 was tough, though. I hope that you enjoyed this one. I hope this helps you in your process. We have 50 days left until the start of fantasy football. Stick with us here at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your leagues this season. Check out all my written work over at fantasypoints.com. Check out Dynasty Life. Check out School of Scott. Check out Dynasty Points. Check out First Read. Check out the Fantasy Points podcast with John Hansen. We are absolutely crushing the podcast game over here at Fantasy Points. All the articles you need, the best data in fantasy football. Fantasy Points has you covered to crush your fantasy football leagues this season. We'll see you soon.